Old people, we're talking about them. I made a video a few weeks ago talking about what kids are buying in the antique shop full of comic books. Let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum and talk about what foot traffic elderly folks are buying from a comic book shop. That's right, folks. We do have all shapes, sizes, antiques, and ages walking into this shop. And it's an interesting opportunity to see people that really don't know comics at all and what they decide to buy. First thing that they are buying is 4-Color. 4-Color is probably still the most extensive anthology series made from the 40s to the 60s that I'm pretty sure still has more issues than Action Comics, which has been running also since the 40s. I made a great video. It's honestly one of my favorites I've ever made, so if you want to check it out, here's a link to that one. 4-Color would cover Disney stuff, Looney Tunes stuff, TV series that were popular at the time, movies, and even pop culture, singers and songwriters, and more. Sports, everything was in these 4-Color comics. Now, collectors typically really like to grab the 40s and the 50s stuff, but a lot of them tend to stop in the 60s. The 60s was, after all, quite printed. But old people, foot traffic that don't know about collectability and stuff, still really enjoy the 60s as much as the 50s and 40s and enjoy the lower price tag. Next up is going to be Archie. And I keep telling myself I'm going to just not collect any Archie at all anymore. After all, the only Archie I'm typically ever able to move is the keys and like 10 centers. I actually can't even move 12-cent Archie. But you know who is buying 10 and 12-cent Archie? Old people. That's right, folks. They are the ones that remember it. Even though it's funny because Archie is so multi-generational, they were there first and they remember it, and they remember the TV show, and they remember everything around it. Most of that stuff I actually put $1 on anyway, so they like it, and they like the fact that it's really cheap. I think I've made videos in the past talking about what are some really difficult comics to move. I do think Archie, Richie Rich, and a lot of those types of books have been really, really hard to move for me, but also most full-time sellers. But there's a target audience for everything. They're out there, and I think with a lot of that Archie stuff, it's these old people. Next is going to be Superman. They actually don't do too much superhero buying in a comic book shop. They stick to what they know, and they like the time period in which superheroes went away. But Superman is, after all, the #1 best-selling comic book of all time, spanning many decades, particularly in the 50s, 60s, right in that pocket that a lot of these folks were much younger. So they look upon it with an extra level of fondness that even collectors often don't have. They were actually there when this stuff was hitting the shelves, and some of them might even remember a book or two that they had, and that's a really cool moment. I'm also going to include in here, but I didn't write it, Wonder Woman and Batman. Also, but Superman's the obvious winner. Next is going to be Dick Tracy. There's some overlap with this and 4-Color. A lot of Dick Tracy books were sold with 4-Color. And unlike some of the other stuff on this list, like the Archie, a lot of the Dick Tracy stuff is actually pretty valuable. A lot of this is 40s we're talking about, so it does have sometimes a much higher price tag. Foot traffic is not the crowd that'll spend bigger dollars at an antique shop full of comic books. That's usually comic collectors maybe coming to see me because of the YouTube channel or whatever. But the foot traffic, they usually spend honestly, $5 max. But where they will spend up is the 40s stuff, like Dick Tracy and anything of that caliber from that time period. After all, they remember Dick Tracy quite fondly. You ask anyone today who's Dick Tracy, I think you're going to have a lot of millennials and Gen Z unaware of who that is. But these old cats remember. Next is going to be romance comics. Romance comics, actually, I've noticed from a collector standpoint, are having a resurgence in popularity. Often Nick Cardy and other famous favorite artists that'll do titles that we love in superheroes also did some covers, and it has a collectible aspect to that. Well, also, old folks love the romance stuff as well. You have to understand that after the war, there was a shift in comics away from superheroes. Obviously, you know it came back very heavily in the Silver Age, but it really got replaced by Western, horror, romance, and so much more. These romance stuff they remember fondly from being the comics more prominently on the shelf, whereas today that stuff is usually hidden deep in the back. Next is going to be pulps and antique fashion magazines. So I kind of put these two together because these are more like book-ish and magazine-ish rather than comic. Old pulps can sometimes even predate the first appearance of Superman. I'm talking 30s and sometimes 20s. I don't get them in very often. I don't see too many people selling pulp collections, to be honest, but I do get a handful a year, and that stuff I usually like to have in the antique spot in this vintage bin that I have all the way on the right. Also, antique fashion magazines. There's about 10 vendors in the shop. I'm just one of the 10. One of the guys has these old, big, almost treasury edition sized magazines from like the 20s that are all fashion, and that sells really well. So they're not just buying old paper, meaning comics, they're buying old paper in these forms of magazines. And they are pretty cool. They like seeing those old advertisements in there. I talked about the shift in comics where superheroes were going out, westerns were coming in. Do you know or understand or grasp how huge westerns were in the 50s? With John Wayne and all those great actors, there was a great western coming out monthly. It's not like how it is today. And of course, there would be comic books of this stuff all over the place. Westerns now, I don't even know if anyone writes westerns. Can you think of any? I really honestly can't, other than Jonah Hex. Back in the day, it was everything. And when you have westerns in the shop, yeah, they're going to sit for probably a year, but you're going to finally get that one old person that picks it up. Next is anything that's $1 that looks old. So actually, here's where like a lot of like Bronze Age books, I'll just throw it in the dollar bins. The old folks like it because it's old and because it's just a buck. Old folks like their deals and they like things that look old. So they're not grabbing up random issues of DC's 52. They're going to the 70s, 60s, 50s, and, well, I don't really put 40s in dollar bins, but you know what I mean. Everybody knows that the greatest generation really likes to stick to their super deals. The Great Depression really had an impact on them even to this day, and so they're always interested in the cheap stuff. And the final one, and probably my number one, is going to be war books. A lot of war books, even sometimes the 40s ones, are a lot more affordable than, let's say, the horror. Pre-code horror gets very expensive very fast. But a lot of pre-code war books, and definitely post-code war books, are very affordable. They don't get too high of a price tag. And these guys, I don't know if they have fond memories of war or what, but they love to grab it up. I even had a little old lady scoop up a pile of some war books and some romance this past year. Just like romance comics on that point, I do think war books is having a slight boost in popularity in the collecting community. At least I've felt that way. I think I've started to see that. At my own sales, I've noticed that war books do actually move. So maybe there's a little bit of overlap there. Plus, I think people in general just like old stuff. And as we get later and later into collecting, the golden age just becomes harder and harder and harder to collect. And it just becomes more desirable through time. There's a couple things on this list that we collectors are interested that we share with our respected elders. But sometimes there's just some things that they're into that we're not really looking at yet, or we don't really care about. It's so cool working out of this antique shop and getting to see the collectors, the kids, the adults, the elders, just every form of person come in the shop and see what they're into. It's really a great experience, and it's provided some really interesting data. I want you guys to like and comment down below one thing on this list that you share in common with the old folks. What's something that you love to grab up that they love too? And as always, keep on hunting. Make sure to come on down to Sentiment Depot's Antiques and Collectibles, located at 238 West Delaware Ave in Pennington, New Jersey. Find so many great books for just $1 and the lowest prices on key comics around. Enjoy a huge selection of graded comics priced up to 20% lower than current fair market value. We are open from Wednesday to Sunday, closed Monday, Tuesday. You got a collection you want to sell? Bring that too. Can't wait to see you there.